All right, guys. So as I mentioned, we're going to do just a brief introduction to global continents and what are global continents. I'm going to kind of sit over here and talk, so I apologize that I'm a talking head or there's just a screen up there. But I've got all my notes on this side. So this is a pretty common sort of view of the whole Earth that you guys might be used to looking at, right? You guys have all seen stuff like this? Natalie, darling, can you run back where that ladder is and pull out 4 or 5 globes and just cast them around the room? All right. Okay. So the Earth is divided up into oceans and continents, right? And one of the things that you kind of see is that, hey, there's a hell of a lot of water here, right? And it's important that you guys understand that these land masses have, for cultural or geological reasons, been sort of divided into certain groupings of things, all right? So looking at the next sort of slide, which I think I can get to here, let's see. Let's take a quick look at what are the continents. So the continents are understood to be large, contiguous, or continuous discrete masses of land ideally separated by expanses of water. Now, that last little phrase there, ideally separated by expanses of water, is a key phrase, particularly when we get to Europe, Africa, and Asia. All right, and maybe a little bit between North America and South America. But at any rate, that gives you kind of an idea of the definition of these things. And so we identify them by convention rather than strict criteria. And again, that applies to that whole idea of, where does Europe divide from Asia? And, it's a little easier to see where Europe divides from Africa. We're going to group them into the classical 7 continents, right? Asia, Africa, North America, South America, Antarctica, Europe, and Australia. And those are in size order, okay? So geologically, right, some of this corresponds to the plate tectonic theory, okay, and the motion of the plates on the Earth's surface. So the largest continent is Asia. And one of the things that I want you to take away from this class is the ability to look at Asia and say, yep, that's Asia. I want you to be able to take a look and say, yeah, I know where India might be. I know where Thailand might be. I know where where Vietnam might have occurred. I got an idea of where China is. I got an idea of where Russia is. Most people think of Russia as a European nation. But if you look at that map, most of Russia, not all of it, but most of it is actually in Asia. Okay? And so those are important things to note. How many of you realize that the majority of Russia was in Asia? So a few of you. Mostly people from Asia or people that have traveled the world. All right. Okay. So Asia is the largest continent. It covers about 30% of the globe. That'll be visible on the next slide. It correlates to about 30% of the total land mass of the Earth, right? So Asia is 1/3 of all the dirt that we have available to us. All right, and it covers about 8.7% of the Earth's surface. All right, the next largest continent is Africa, and you can start to see right there where the lines of distinction might start to blur, because what's above Africa? Europe. And what's sort of to the, looking at that image, what's off to the right side of it? Asia. But most people are not clear that, Saudi Arabia and the Arabian Peninsula is in Asia. We kind of tend to think of it as, no, that's in the Middle East, right? So from a continent perspective, it is in Africa, or it is in Asia. So some statistics. I'm not going to go too carefully into these things. I'm going to provide you these notes, and so you'll be able to see. So Asia and Africa together constitute half of the total land of the Earth. Okay, 20 and 30. So, oops, went the wrong way. Here we go. North America. So you can see North America. You might discover some things. I know us old folks kind of thought that Central America was its own continent or something like that, but it's not. I also never associated the idea of Greenland, right, with North America, but it is. So, you know, we're the third largest continent here in North America. We make up 16%, 16.5% of the total land area, and we cover 4 or 5% of the Earth's surface. All right, South America, fourth largest continent. It makes up approximately 12% of the land area, and you know, it pretty much starts right where Panama and Colombia come together. Okay. Antarctica. Okay, oops. Antarctica. Antarctica is the 5th largest continent, and most people don't think of Antarctica as necessarily a landmass. We think of it as a big giant chunk of ice, right? I do. That's the mental picture that I have of Antarctica is a big chunk of ice. But the reality is, it is a landmass. There is a plate under it, and there is dirt there, unlike the North Pole, right? We think of the North Pole as where Santa Claus lives, right? There's reindeers and candy canes and all sorts of other stuff like that, but there's no land at the North Pole. That's another thing that a lot of people don't necessarily know. So, all right. More statistics. Europe is the second smallest of the continents, and you know, it's got a huge chunk of the world's population. Asia is the most populous, but Europe is the second most populous continent. Actually, no, Africa, then Europe. All right, and so it's a small area geographically, but it contains huge populations, and there are a lot of countries all smashed up into a little tiny area. Culturally, the United States is more closely tied to Europe than any other part of the world. Okay. Australia, the smallest continent on the face of the Earth. All right, and you can see right there where Australia, whenever I see Australia or I think of it on one of those globes that we've just put out there, I think of it as like out in the middle of nowhere. But the reality is it's actually not that far off the coast of Asia. So, you know, some basic small boats and decent weather conditions, and you can get across there pretty easily. All right, so again, this was just a quick primer to get you guys to understand there are 7. We're going to look at this world as having 7 continents, okay? And it becomes important for you to be able to identify the boundaries of it. Now, one of the problems that you guys are going to encounter, as I mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, is the boundary between Asia and Europe. All right, we'll talk a little bit more about that in the future, or potentially I can call up Google Earth, but there are some bodies of water in that area that you need to know what they are. Predominantly the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And there are some points that are in Northern Europe, Northern Asia that you need to know, because that'll help you to kind of figure out where the dividing line is between the 2 continents. All right, we'll talk about that a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this.